The morning sun cast long shadows across the reservation as Sarah Miller stepped out of her father's pickup truck, her small suitcase clutched tightly in her trembling hands. At 18, she had never been away from home for more than a night, and now she was being left with strangers in a place that felt like the edge of the world. Her father's face was stern as he handed her the envelope containing her marriage certificate and a small amount of money. "Remember what we discussed," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. "This is what's best for everyone. The White Horse family is respected here, and Joseph is a good man. He'll take care of you." Sarah nodded, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She had met Joseph Whitehorse only twice before today, both times in formal settings where few words were exchanged. What she knew about him could fit on the back of her hand. He was 32, a widower with 2 young children, and owned a small ranch on the Modoc reservation. Her father had arranged this marriage as a solution to problems she didn't fully understand. Speaking of debts and obligations that needed to be settled, the house before her was modest but well-maintained, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that showed someone cared about making it a home. As her father's truck disappeared down the dusty road, Sarah felt truly alone for the first time in her life. She walked slowly toward the front door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Joseph emerged before she could knock, his weathered face unreadable. He was taller than she remembered, with graying hair at his temples and eyes that held a depth of sadness she hadn't noticed during their brief meetings. Behind him, 2 small faces peered out curiously. His children, she realized. A boy who looked about 8 and a girl who couldn't be more than 6. "Sarah," Joseph said simply, taking her suitcase. "Welcome." The children retreated as she entered, but she could feel their eyes following her every movement. The house was clean and organized, with handmade furniture and colorful woven rugs that spoke of native tradition, mixed with practical living. Photographs lined the mantelpiece, most featuring a beautiful woman with kind eyes who Sarah assumed was Joseph's deceased wife. "The children are shy," Joseph explained, noticing her gaze. "They'll warm up to you in time. Tommy is 8 and little Mary just turned 6 last month. They've been without a mother for 2 years now." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of what was expected of her. She wasn't just a wife in this arrangement. She was meant to be a mother to children who had already lost so much. The responsibility felt overwhelming, especially since she had no experience with children beyond occasionally helping with her younger cousins. Joseph showed her to a small room at the back of the house. "This is yours," he said. "I know this isn't what most young women dream of for their wedding day, but I want you to know that you're safe here. I won't pressure you into anything you're not ready for." His words brought both relief and confusion. Their marriage ceremony had been a simple civil affair the day before, with only their fathers present as witnesses. It had felt more like signing a business contract than beginning a life together. Now, standing in this unfamiliar room with this man she barely knew, Sarah wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. The first few days passed in awkward silence, punctuated by stilted conversations about practical matters. Sarah learned the routine of the household: breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner when Joseph returned from working the ranch. The children observed her with the wariness of small animals, accepting her presence but keeping their distance. Tommy, the older boy, had his father's serious demeanor and seemed to carry responsibilities beyond his years. He helped with chores without being asked and kept a protective eye on his younger sister. Mary was more like a ghost, slipping in and out of rooms silently, her large dark eyes taking in everything but revealing nothing. Sarah tried to make herself useful, cooking meals from recipes she remembered her mother teaching her and keeping the house tidy. Joseph was polite but distant, treating her more like a helpful boarder than a wife. In the evenings, he would sit on the front porch while she helped the children with their homework, or read them stories from the small collection of books in the living room. It was during one of these evening reading sessions that Mary first spoke directly to her. Sarah had been reading a story about a princess who had to leave her home to live in a castle with strangers, when the little girl suddenly said, "Did you have to leave your mama too?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She looked into Mary's solemn face and saw a reflection of her own confusion and loss. "Yes," she said softly. "I miss her very much." Mary nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I miss my mama too. Daddy says she's watching us from the sky now, but I wish she would come back." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She reached out tentatively and was surprised when Mary didn't pull away. "I think your mama would want you to be happy," she said. And I think she'd want someone to take care of you and Tommy until you're all grown up. Are you going to take care of us? Mary asked with the directness that only children possess. Sarah looked toward the porch where Joseph sat smoking his pipe, then back at the two children who were waiting for her answer. She thought about her own mother's tears when they said goodbye, about the mysterious circumstances that had led to this arrangement, and about the strange mix of fear and hope she felt in this new place. I'm going to try, she said finally. But you'll have to help me learn how because I've never been a mama before. For the first time since her arrival, Mary smiled. It was a small, tentative thing, but it felt like the first ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Tommy, who had been pretending to focus on his arithmetic, looked up with something that might have been approval in his eyes. That night, as Sarah lay in her narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the reservation settling into darkness, she reflected on the conversation with Mary. She had been thinking of this arrangement as something being done to her, but perhaps there was another way to look at it. Maybe she wasn't just a solution to her father's problems, or a convenient caretaker for Joseph's children. Maybe she could choose to make this into something real, something that could heal the various wounds that had brought them all together. Outside her window, she could hear Joseph moving around the house, checking doors and windows, and what she was learning was his nightly routine. Soon she knew he would settle into his own room across the hall, and the house would grow quiet except for the gentle breathing of sleeping children. For the first time since arriving, Sarah felt something other than fear or homesickness. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it wasn't despair either. It was possibility, fragile and uncertain, but real nonetheless. 3 weeks into her new life, Sarah began to notice things about Joseph that intrigued her. He was gentle with his children in ways that surprised her, given his gruff exterior. She would catch him braiding Mary's hair with surprising skill, or patiently explaining mechanical concepts to Tommy while they worked on the ranch equipment together. His hands, scarred from years of manual labor, could be incredibly tender when applying a bandage to a scraped knee or tucking a blanket around small shoulders. But there were other things she noticed too, things that didn't quite add up. Sometimes, late at night, she would hear him on the telephone speaking in hushed tones, conversations that would end abruptly if he heard footsteps in the hallway. Mail would arrive addressed to him that he would quickly tuck away without opening in front of the family. And there were visitors, men who would come to the ranch during the day when the children were at school, men who spoke with Joseph in serious tones on the front porch, before leaving as quickly as they had come. Sarah's curiosity about these mysteries grew stronger as she became more comfortable. In the household routine, she had developed a genuine affection for Tommy and Mary, and they had begun to accept her presence with less wariness. Tommy had started asking her opinion on his school projects, and Mary had taken to following her around the house, chattering about everything and nothing in the way that children do when they finally feel safe. It was Mary who inadvertently provided the first real clue about the secrets Joseph was keeping. Sarah was helping her clean her room when the little girl pulled out a small wooden box from under her bed. "Look what I found in Daddy's desk," Mary said proudly, opening the box to reveal a collection of small photographs and what looked like official documents. "I was looking for crayons and I found this. Daddy doesn't know I took it." Sarah's heart skipped as she recognized some of the photographs. They showed Joseph with his first wife, but there were others too. Pictures of Joseph in what looked like military uniform, standing with other soldiers in front of buildings that definitely weren't on the reservation. One photograph showed him shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside what appeared to be a government building. "Mary, sweetie, these belong to your daddy," Sarah said gently, taking the box. "We should put them back where you found them." But Mary had already lost interest and had moved on to playing with her dolls. Sarah, however, found herself staring at the photographs with growing confusion. The man in the military uniform looked like Joseph, but somehow different. Younger, certainly, but also more polished, more official. This wasn't the image of a simple rancher who had spent his whole life on the reservation. That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah approached Joseph as he sat on the porch. She had decided to return the box directly to him, but also to ask some gentle questions about what she had seen. "Mary found this in your desk while looking for crayons," she said, holding out the wooden box. "I thought you should know." Joseph's expression changed immediately when he saw the box. The relaxed posture he had developed over the past few weeks vanished, replaced by the tense wariness she remembered from their first meeting. He took the box from her hands and held it tightly. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "Just some photographs," Sarah said honestly. "Joseph, were you in the military?" For a long moment he didn't answer. The silence stretched between them until Sarah began to wonder if she had overstepped some invisible boundary. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "There are things about my past that I can't discuss," he said. "Things that happened before I came back to the reservation, before I married Anna, before the children were born. Those things don't matter now. But they do matter," Sarah found herself saying, surprising them both with her boldness. "I'm living in this house, caring for your children, trying to build some kind of life here. Don't I have a right to know who you really are?" Joseph stood abruptly, the wooden box still clutched in his hands. "You have a right to safety and security," he said. "You have a right to be treated with respect and kindness. But my past is my burden to carry, not yours." "What if it becomes my burden too?" Sarah asked. "What if whatever you're hiding affects Tommy and Mary?" The question seemed to strike him like a physical blow. He turned to look at her fully for the first time since she had handed him the box, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. "It won't," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I've made sure it won't." But even as he said the words, Sarah could see that he wasn't entirely certain. The next morning, she noticed that he moved the children's beds to rooms farther from the front of the house, claiming that they would sleep better away from the noise of the road. He also installed new locks on the doors and began keeping a rifle closer to hand than she had seen before. The changes were subtle, but they created an atmosphere of tension that even the children seemed to sense. Tommy became more serious and watchful, while Mary began having nightmares that left her calling out for her mother in the middle of the night. Sarah found herself lying awake, listening for sounds that might indicate trouble, though she wasn't even sure what kind of trouble she should be expecting. It was during one of these sleepless nights that she heard Joseph moving around the house again, but this time his footsteps were different, more purposeful, more urgent. She heard the sound of drawers opening and closing, the rustle of papers, and what sounded like objects being moved or packed. Unable to resist her curiosity, Sarah crept to her door and peered out into the hallway. She could see light coming from Joseph's room and shadows moving against the wall. When she heard his footsteps approaching, she quickly retreated to her bed, but not before catching a glimpse of him carrying what looked like a suitcase toward the back of the house. The next morning, Joseph announced that he would be away for a few days on business. He arranged for his sister Elena to come stay with Sarah and the children, though he was vague about the nature of his trip and when exactly he would return. Elena Whitehorse was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Within hours of her arrival, Sarah could tell that Elena knew more about Joseph's situation than she was letting on. The older woman watched the windows carefully, asked pointed questions about any strangers who might have come to the house recently, and made sure that the children stayed close to home. "Has Joseph told you anything about why he left the reservation when he was young?" Elena asked Sarah on the second day of Joseph's absence. "He said there were things about his past he couldn't discuss," Sarah replied carefully. Elena nodded, as if this was the answer she had expected. "My brother is a good man," she said, "but he made some choices when he was young that he's still paying for. When he married Anna and came back here, we all hoped that part of his life was over." "What kind of choices?" Sarah asked. Elena looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "The kind that involve powerful people who don't like to be crossed," she said finally. "The kind that make a man change his name and hide on a reservation for 15 years, hoping they'll forget about him." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. "Change his name?" "Joseph Whitehorse wasn't the name he was born with," Elena said quietly. "And this arrangement with your father, it wasn't just about settling debts or finding a mother for the children. It was about creating another layer of protection, another reason for certain people to believe he's just a simple rancher with a family to protect." The implications of Elena's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her marriage wasn't just an arrangement between families. It was part of an elaborate deception designed to hide Joseph from people who might want to hurt him. And now, whether she had agreed to it or not, she was part of that deception too. Joseph returned from his mysterious trip 3 days later, but the man who walked through the front door was different from the one who had left. The wariness that had temporarily faded during their first few weeks together was back, stronger than ever. His eyes constantly scanned the horizon, and he jumped at sounds that had never bothered him before. Sarah noticed that he had acquired new items during his absence. A second rifle, more sophisticated locks for the windows, and what looked like a radio communication device that he kept hidden in the barn. The children sensed the change immediately. Tommy became even more protective of his sister, and Mary's nightmares returned with increased frequency. Sarah found herself caught between her growing concern for the family's safety and her frustration at being kept in the dark about the source of the danger. It was Elena who finally provided more pieces of the puzzle before she left to return to her own home. She pulled Sarah aside on the morning of her departure, her expression grave. "There's something you need to understand about why your father agreed to this marriage," Elena said. "It wasn't just about money or debts. Your father has connections, Sarah. Political connections that go back generations. Joseph needed those connections, and your family needed the protection that comes with being associated with someone the government considers valuable." Sarah stared at Elena in confusion. "What are you talking about? My father works for the county government. He's not some important political figure. Your father's family has been involved in land deals and tribal negotiations for over a century," Elena explained. "They've been intermediaries between the government and various tribes, including ours. Joseph's real name is James Morrison, and 15 years ago he was working for a government agency that doesn't officially exist. He discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, and he made the mistake of trying to do the right thing with that information." The world seemed to shift around Sarah as she processed this revelation. "What kind of information?" "The kind that could destroy careers and maybe topple governments," Elena said quietly. "The kind that makes people disappear permanently. When James realized what he was up against, he came to us for help. We gave him a new identity, a new life, and the protection of tribal sovereignty. But that protection only goes so far." Sarah felt sick. "And marrying me was supposed to strengthen that protection somehow?" "Your father's reputation and connections make it much more difficult for Joseph's enemies to move against him without causing a larger political scandal," Elena confirmed. "As long as he's just a rancher married to the daughter of a respected government liaison, he's not worth the risk. But if that cover is blown—" Elena didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood that her marriage wasn't just a business arrangement or even a protective deception. It was literally a matter of life and death. After Elena left, Sarah found herself observing Joseph with new eyes. She began to notice the professional way he moved, the strategic thinking behind decisions she had previously attributed to simple caution. When he taught Tommy how to use tools, she realized he was also teaching the boy how to be aware of his surroundings. When he insisted that Mary learn to ride horses, she understood that he was ensuring his daughter could escape quickly if necessary. The revelation changed something fundamental in their relationship. Sarah no longer felt like an unwilling participant in someone else's arrangement. Instead, she began to see herself as an active partner in protecting this small family that had become precious to her. She started paying attention to the things Joseph tried to shield her from: the late-night phone calls, the careful way he monitored local news, the coded conversations he had with certain visitors. One evening, while helping Tommy with his homework, she casually asked him about his earliest memories of his father. "Daddy used to be different," Tommy said thoughtfully. "Before Mama got sick, he used to go away on trips a lot. He would bring back presents from big cities, and he always wore nice clothes. Mama used to say he was important, but then she got sick and he stopped going away. Do you miss those times?" Sarah asked. Tommy considered this seriously. "I like having Daddy here all the time better," he said finally. "But sometimes I think he misses being important. Sometimes he looks sad when he thinks nobody's watching." That night, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of avoiding Joseph as she usually did in the evenings, she sought him out on the front porch where he sat smoking his pipe and staring into the darkness. "Elena told me," she said simply, settling into the chair beside him. Joseph went very still. "Told you what?" "About James Morrison. About why you really needed to get married. About why my father agreed to it." For a long moment, Joseph said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "I never wanted you to know," he said. "I thought if you could just live a normal life here, if the children could grow up safely, then the deception would be worth it. I thought I could keep you separate from all of it. But I'm not separate from it," Sarah pointed out. "I'm part of it now, whether I chose to be or not. And if I'm going to help protect Tommy and Mary, I need to understand what we're protecting them from." Joseph turned to look at her, and she saw something in his expression that she had never seen before, a mixture of gratitude and hope that took her breath away. "It's a long story," he warned. "I have time," Sarah said simply. And so, as the stars appeared one by one in the clear reservation sky, Joseph began to tell her about the man he used to be. He spoke of working for a government intelligence agency, of uncovering a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of federal law enforcement, of trying to expose corruption only to find himself marked for elimination by the very people he had trusted. He told her about the evidence he had hidden, the documents that proved several high-ranking officials were involved in illegal weapons sales to foreign governments. He explained how tribal sovereignty had provided him with a refuge that regular witness protection could not, and how the threat had never truly disappeared. It had simply been dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. "Recently, there have been signs that they're looking again," Joseph said quietly. "New faces asking questions in towns near the reservation. Phone calls to the tribal council asking about residents. That's why I had to go away last week, to move some of the evidence to a more secure location." Sarah absorbed all of this information with a calmness that surprised her. Perhaps it was because the truth, however dangerous, was preferable to the uncertainty she had been living with. "What happens if they find you?" she asked. "They won't just find me," Joseph said grimly. "They'll find all of us, and they won't take any chances about loose ends." The weight of responsibility that Sarah had felt for Tommy and Mary suddenly became much heavier. These children weren't just grieving the loss of their mother. They were living under a death sentence because of their father's attempt to do the right thing. "Then we make sure they don't find you," Sarah said with a determination that surprised them both. Joseph stared at her. "Sarah, you don't understand what you're saying. These people have resources, connections, unlimited patience. They've been hunting me for 15 years. And for 15 years you've stayed ahead of them," Sarah pointed out. "But now you're not doing it alone anymore. Now you have backup." For the first time since she had known him, Joseph smiled. Not the careful, controlled expression he usually wore, but a real smile that transformed his entire face. "You realize that if you help me, there's no going back," he said. "You'll be as marked as I am." Sarah thought about her quiet life before coming to the reservation, about the predictable future that had been planned for her, about the safe path she was choosing to abandon. "Maybe I was marked the moment I married you," she said. "Maybe the only choice I really have is whether to be a victim or a fighter." As they sat together in the darkness, planning how to better protect their family and secure their future, Sarah realized that her arranged marriage had become something she had never expected. A true partnership built on trust, shared danger, and a growing love that neither of them had been looking for. The partnership between Sarah and Joseph began to take shape over the following weeks. Sarah proved to have an unexpected talent for observation and analysis, skills that complemented Joseph's tactical experience. She began monitoring local news and government announcements for any signs that outside agencies were taking interest in reservation affairs. Joseph taught her how to recognize surveillance, how to vary their routines without alarming the children, and how to prepare for the possibility that they might need to disappear quickly. Their first real test came sooner than either had hoped. Sarah was in town buying supplies when she noticed a man in an expensive suit asking questions at the general store. He claimed to be a journalist researching a story about successful Native American businesses, but something about his questions felt wrong. He was too interested in specific families, too focused on who had moved to the reservation recently, and too well dressed for someone supposedly doing rural research. Sarah completed her shopping normally, but made note of the man's license plate and the specific questions he had asked. When she returned home, she found Joseph working on a fence repair with Tommy, but she could see the tension in his shoulders that meant he was hyper-aware of his surroundings. "We need to talk," she said quietly when Tommy ran back to the house for tools. That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah described her encounter with the stranger. Joseph listened intently, asking detailed questions about the man's appearance, behavior, and the exact wording of his inquiries. "He's not a journalist," Joseph said grimly. "Journalists don't ask about recent arrivals unless they already know something specific." "This sounds like reconnaissance. What do we do?" Sarah asked, fighting down the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "We accelerate our timeline," Joseph said. "I was hoping we'd have more time to prepare." But if they're already sending advance scouts, we need to be ready to move within days rather than weeks. Over the next 48 hours, their quiet ranch life transformed into a carefully orchestrated preparation for potential flight. Joseph retrieved additional hidden supplies from various locations around the property. Sarah worked with Elena, who returned immediately when called, to establish safe houses and communication protocols with trusted tribal members. They prepared emergency packs for each family member and rehearsed evacuation procedures disguised as family camping trips. The children, sensing the increased activity but not understanding its significance, became more clingy and nervous. Mary began having nightmares again, and Tommy started following Joseph everywhere, as if afraid his father might disappear. Sarah found herself torn between the need for secrecy and her desire to comfort children who were clearly frightened by changes they couldn't comprehend. It was Mary who inadvertently provided their next piece of crucial intelligence. She came running into the house one afternoon, excited about the nice man who had given her candy while she was playing near the road. Sarah's blood went cold. "What nice man, sweetheart?" "He was in a big car," Mary said happily. "He said he was looking for someone and asked if I knew a man named James. I told him I only know Daddy, and his name is Joseph." Sarah immediately called for Joseph, who came running when he heard the urgency in her voice. After Mary repeated her story, Joseph's face went pale. "Did he ask you anything else?" Joseph asked gently. "He wanted to know how many people live in our house," Mary said. "I told him there's me and Tommy and Daddy and Sarah. He seemed really interested in Sarah." Joseph and Sarah exchanged a look that communicated volumes. The surveillance phase was over. The hunters had found their target and were now gathering information for an active operation. "We leave tonight," Joseph said quietly. The next few hours passed in controlled chaos. Elena arrived with additional vehicles and several tribal council members who would help create confusion about the family's whereabouts. Sarah packed essential items for the children, while Joseph secured or destroyed anything that could provide information about their next destination. They told Tommy and Mary that they were going on an extended camping trip, a story that both children accepted with the resilience that had already been tested too many times in their young lives. As darkness fell, they implemented their escape plan. Elena and another woman, both wearing scarves and hats similar to Sarah's usual style, drove the family's regular vehicles in different directions to create false trails. Joseph, Sarah, and the children slipped away in an unmarked truck, taking back roads that would avoid any potential surveillance points. The safe house was a cabin owned by distant relatives of Joseph's first wife, located deep in the mountains about 3 hours from the reservation. It was rustic but well supplied, with generators for power and enough provisions to last several weeks. More importantly, it was connected to a network of similar refugees that could provide a path to complete relocation if necessary. The first few days in hiding were difficult for everyone. The children were confused and homesick, missing their familiar surroundings and routines. Joseph was tense and watchful, monitoring radio communications and maintaining contact with Elena and other trusted allies. Sarah found herself serving as the emotional anchor for the family, keeping the children occupied and calm while supporting Joseph's security efforts. It was during this period that Sarah began to understand the true depth of sacrifice that Joseph had made in choosing to expose corruption 15 years earlier. He had given up not just his career and his identity, but also his freedom to live without fear. Every decision he made was filtered through the lens of potential threat assessment. Every relationship he formed carried the risk of endangering innocent people. Every moment of happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that it could be destroyed at any time. But she also began to see the man he had been before fear and hiding had shaped his life. Away from the constant vigilance required at the ranch, Joseph began to relax slightly. He told stories to the children about his travels in his former life, shared skills and knowledge that revealed the scope of his intelligence and education, and allowed glimpses of the idealism that had driven him to risk everything for principle. Sarah found herself falling in love not just with the protective provider he had become, but with the complex, principled man he had always been underneath. Their partnership deepened into something more intimate as they shared the stress and responsibility of protecting their family. Late at night, after the children were asleep, they would sit by the fire planning their next moves and sharing stories of their separate pasts. It was during one of these conversations that Joseph revealed the full extent of the evidence he had preserved. It's not just documents, he explained. I have recordings, photographs, financial records that prove a conspiracy reaching into Congress and federal law enforcement. The evidence could bring down at least 6 high-ranking officials and expose a network that's been operating for decades. Then why haven't you used it? Sarah asked. Because the moment I surface with that evidence, we become targets not just of individual bad actors, but of institutional protection mechanisms, Joseph said. The system will try to destroy the evidence and eliminate anyone who has seen it. That includes you and the children now. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. But if the evidence remains hidden forever, then those people continue to operate freely. They continue to hurt others. I know, Joseph said heavily. It's the choice I've been wrestling with for 15 years. Personal safety versus public responsibility. What if there was a way to expose the truth without exposing ourselves? Sarah asked thoughtfully. Joseph looked at her with interest. What do you mean? You have connections through Elena and the tribal council. I have connections through my father's work. What if we could create a situation where the evidence surfaces through channels that can't be traced back to us? For the first time since they had gone into hiding, Joseph looked genuinely hopeful. It would have to be very carefully planned, he said. And it would still be incredibly dangerous. More dangerous than spending the rest of our lives running and hiding. Sarah countered, as they began to sketch out the framework of a plan that could finally end their long nightmare. Sarah realized that her marriage had evolved into something far more significant than either protection or partnership. She had found her purpose in helping to right an old wrong, and in the process she had discovered a love worth fighting for. The plan that Sarah and Joseph developed over their weeks in hiding was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than trying to surface the evidence themselves, they would create a situation where multiple independent parties would simultaneously discover different pieces of the puzzle, making it impossible for the conspiracy to contain or discredit the revelations. Sarah's father, despite his role in arranging their marriage, had genuine connections throughout the federal government bureaucracy. Joseph's evidence included detailed financial records that could be interpreted as routine audit discrepancies by the right accountant. Elena's position on the tribal council gave her access to senators and congressmen who were involved in Native American affairs oversight. The key was timing and coordination. Each contact would receive just enough information to trigger official investigations, but not enough to realize they were part of a larger coordinated exposure effort. Joseph's years of intelligence training proved invaluable in structuring the information drops to look like independent discoveries, rather than a planned revelation. Their first major obstacle was establishing secure communication with their allies while remaining hidden. Joseph had anticipated this problem and had set up an elaborate system of coded messages and dead drops before they went into hiding. Elena served as their primary intermediary, traveling between the safe house and the reservation to coordinate the growing network of supporters. Sarah took on the delicate task of re-establishing contact with her father. She knew that their phone conversations were potentially monitored, so she developed a system of seemingly innocent discussions about family, news that actually conveyed detailed instructions about document placement and timing. I've been thinking about grandmother's recipe collection, she told her father during one carefully planned call, especially the one for apple pie that she kept in the blue folder. I think it would be nice to share it with some of our friends in Washington who appreciate good cooking. Her father, despite his initial confusion, began to understand that his daughter was speaking in code about something far more serious than recipes. His response indicated that he was willing to cooperate. I'll look for that recipe collection. I think I know exactly which friends would appreciate grandmother's special ingredients. Meanwhile, Joseph worked on preparing the evidence packages. Each bundle of documents was carefully selected to tell part of the story, without revealing the existence of other parts. Financial records went to investigative journalists known for their expertise in government corruption. Technical specifications of illegal weapons sales were directed toward defense contractors who would recognize their significance and report them to appropriate oversight committees. Personnel files showing connections between conspiracy members were anonymously delivered to congressional staff members who specialized in intelligence oversight. The children, still unaware of the true reason for their extended camping trip, had adapted to life in the mountain cabin with remarkable resilience. Tommy had taken on additional responsibilities, helping with cooking and maintenance tasks that made him feel important and useful. Mary had overcome her initial homesickness and now treated their hideout as an adventure, creating elaborate games with her dolls that involved brave families living in secret mountain kingdoms. Sarah found herself marveling at the children's ability to find joy and normalcy even in uncertain circumstances. Their resilience reminded her daily of what was at stake in their dangerous gamble. These children deserved a future free from the shadow of their father's past, a chance to grow up without looking over their shoulders. The first signs that their plan was working came through Elena's carefully coded reports. A congressional subcommittee had quietly opened an investigation into defense contract irregularities after receiving an anonymous package of financial documents. A veteran investigative journalist had begun asking questions about connections between certain federal officials and foreign arms dealers. An IRS auditor had flagged suspicious patterns in the financial records of several high-ranking government employees. Each development was encouraging, but Joseph cautioned against premature optimism. The real test will come when these separate investigations start connecting to each other, he explained to Sarah as they monitored news reports on their battery-powered radio. That's when the people we're targeting will realize they're facing coordinated exposure, rather than random problems. Their patience was rewarded when Elena brought news that the first major breakthrough had occurred. The congressional subcommittee had issued subpoenas for documents that would inevitably reveal connections to the weapons sales conspiracy. More importantly, the investigation had gained enough momentum that shutting it down would require overt political intervention that would only draw more attention to the issues being investigated. It's working, Elena reported during one of her visits to the cabin. But now comes the dangerous part. They know someone is actively working against them, and they're going to start looking for the source of the leaks more aggressively. As if to confirm Elena's warning, she brought disturbing news about increased activity around the reservation. Federal agents claiming to investigate terrorist activity had begun interviewing tribal members about suspicious behavior or unusual visitors. The questions were clearly focused on finding Joseph and Sarah, though the agents were careful not to use their names directly. They're getting desperate, Joseph observed. That's good news for the investigation, but bad news for our safety. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also take risks they wouldn't normally consider. The accuracy of Joseph's assessment became clear a few days later, when Elena arrived at the cabin with genuine fear in her eyes. They took my nephew Danny for questioning, she reported. They held him for 6 hours, asking about everyone in our family, everyone who visits the reservation, everyone who might be hiding something. They threatened to arrest him on drug charges if he didn't cooperate. Sarah felt sick. Their efforts to expose corruption were now endangering innocent people who had done nothing but offer them shelter and support. Maybe we should consider stopping, she said quietly. If we stop now, it all becomes pointless, Joseph replied. The investigations will lose momentum, the evidence will be discredited, and everyone who helped us will still be at risk because they'll be seen as potential future threats. But if we continue, more people could get hurt, Sarah pointed out. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the same moral dilemma that Sarah was experiencing. There's a third option, he said finally. We could surface publicly, make ourselves the target, and take the heat off everyone else. The suggestion hung in the air between them like a death sentence. They all knew that revealing their location would likely mean the end of their safety, possibly forever. If we do that, we need to make sure the children are protected first, Sarah said, surprising herself with her calm acceptance of the possibility. There are people who would take them, keep them safe, Elena confirmed. Families in Canada who have helped other refugees. They would be loved and cared for, but you might never see them again. The thought of losing Tommy and Mary was almost unbearable to Sarah, but she realized that their safety was more important than her happiness. Over the past month, she had truly become their mother in every way that mattered. A mother's job was to protect her children, even if that protection required terrible sacrifice. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Joseph sat by the fire discussing the impossible choice they were facing. They could continue hiding while others suffered for helping them. They could surrender themselves to protect their allies, or they could send the children away and make a final stand that would likely cost them everything. "I never wanted you to face this choice," Joseph said quietly. "When I agreed to marry you, I thought I could keep you separate from the worst of it." "Maybe I was never meant to be separate from it," Sarah replied. "Maybe this is why I was really brought here, not just to care for your children, but to help you finish what you started 15 years ago." As they held each other in the firelight, both of them understood that their love had been forged in crisis and tested by impossible circumstances. Whatever decision they made would define not just their future, but the kind of people they chose to be when everything they cared about was at stake. The next morning brought news that forced their hand. Elena arrived with word that the congressional investigation had uncovered evidence of ongoing illegal activities, not just historical corruption. The conspiracy they were exposing was still active, still causing harm, still destroying lives. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "The agents questioning people aren't just looking for you anymore. They're looking for the children too. They seem to think that controlling Tommy and Mary might be a way to control Joseph." The threat to the children eliminated any remaining doubt about what they had to do. That afternoon, Sarah began preparing Tommy and Mary for another journey, this one that would take them far from the danger that seemed to follow their family wherever they went. The hardest conversation of Sarah's life took place on a sunny morning beside the mountain cabin where they had found temporary safety. Tommy and Mary sat on a fallen log, swinging their legs and eating the pancakes she had made for what might be their last breakfast together as a family. "We need to talk to you about something very important," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the tears she was fighting back. Joseph sat beside her, his usually controlled expression showing the strain of what they were about to do. "You both know that sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions to keep the people they love safe," he said gently. Mary looked up from her pancakes with the intuitive awareness that children sometimes possess. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "Not trouble exactly," Sarah said carefully. "But there are some bad people who want to hurt Daddy. And they might try to hurt you too to make Daddy do what they want." Tommy, who had been quietly observant throughout their weeks in hiding, straightened up with a seriousness that broke Sarah's heart. "So we have to go away again," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Joseph confirmed. "But this time you'll be going somewhere very special, with people who will take care of you until it's safe for us to be together again." "How long?" Mary asked, her small voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air because none of them could answer it honestly. Sarah took a deep breath and chose the words she hoped would give the children strength rather than despair. "We don't know exactly," she said, "but no matter how long it takes, no matter how far apart we are, you will always be our children and we will always be your family. That will never change." The next few hours were spent in careful preparation and painful farewells. Elena had arranged for a trusted family from a neighboring reservation to take the children across the border into Canada, where they would be placed with relatives who had experience protecting refugees. The children would keep their first names but take on a new family identity, at least temporarily. Sarah helped Mary pack her favorite doll and the few belongings that could safely travel with them. Tommy, trying to be brave, insisted he didn't need many things, but Sarah noticed him carefully tucking away a small carved horse that Joseph had given him for his last birthday. "I want you to remember something very important," Sarah told each child during their private goodbye moments. "Your daddy is a hero. He saw people doing bad things and he tried to stop them even though it was dangerous. That's why we have to be separated for a while. But heroes don't give up and neither do their families." The actual departure was swift to minimize the pain for everyone involved. The children were bundled into a nondescript van with their temporary guardians, a middle-aged couple who spoke to them gently in a mixture of English and their native language. Mary cried silently, pressing her face against the window as the van pulled away. Tommy sat straight and still, his young face set in an expression that reminded Sarah heartbreakingly of his father. After the children were gone, Sarah and Joseph spent several hours in grieving silence, holding each other and trying to process the magnitude of what they had just done. They had made themselves truly alone in the world in order to protect the children they loved. "They'll be safe," Elena assured them before she left to return to the reservation. "And when this is over, we'll find a way to bring them home." But Sarah and Joseph both understood that when this is over might never come, at least not in a way that would allow them to resume their previous life. They were about to step fully into the light, making themselves visible targets in order to ensure that the corruption they were exposing could not be buried or ignored. The decision to go public was implemented with the same careful planning that had characterized their evidence distribution campaign. Rather than simply walking into a federal building and announcing themselves, they orchestrated their revelation to maximize impact and minimize the chance that they could be silenced. Before their story was heard, Joseph prepared a comprehensive written statement detailing his experiences with the conspiracy, the evidence he had preserved, and the years of hiding that had followed his initial attempt to expose corruption. Sarah worked with her father to arrange for this statement to be simultaneously delivered to multiple news organizations, congressional offices, and law enforcement agencies that were not potentially compromised. They also prepared video testimony that would be automatically released if anything happened to them, creating a dead man's switch that would make silencing them counterproductive. For their enemies, the location they chose for their public emergence was carefully selected for maximum symbolic impact and security. The steps of the federal courthouse in the state capitol would provide a public forum that would be difficult to compromise, while also offering multiple escape routes if the situation became dangerous. On the morning they had chosen for their revelation, Sarah woke before dawn feeling strangely calm. The months of hiding and planning had led to this moment, and she was ready to face whatever consequences followed. "Are you afraid?" Joseph asked as they prepared for what might be their final morning together. Terrified, Sarah admitted, but also relieved. "I'm tired of running and hiding. I'm tired of being afraid for Tommy and Mary. Whatever happens today, at least it will be honest." Joseph nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They had both discovered that living in truth, even dangerous truth, was preferable to living in safe deception. They drove to the courthouse in a borrowed car, taking a circuitous route that allowed them to verify they weren't being followed. Sarah carried copies of Joseph's statement and evidence summaries in a briefcase that had once belonged to her father. Joseph wore the only suit he had been able to acquire during their months in hiding, a simple outfit that nevertheless restored some of his former dignity and authority. The courthouse steps were busy with the usual morning traffic of lawyers, clerks, and citizens conducting legal business. Sarah and Joseph positioned themselves in a location that would be visible to passing reporters and courthouse personnel, then waited for the appointed time when their written statements would be delivered to their various targets. At exactly 9 o'clock, Joseph stepped forward and began to speak in a clear, carrying voice that immediately attracted attention from passers-by. "My name is James Morrison, formerly a federal intelligence officer, currently living under the assumed identity of Joseph Whitehorse. 15 years ago, I discovered evidence of a conspiracy involving illegal weapons sales and corruption, reaching into the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Today I am presenting that evidence to the American people through their elected representatives and free press." As curious onlookers began to gather and reporters started arriving in response to tips that had been strategically placed, Sarah stood beside Joseph and realized that their long flight was finally ending. Whatever came next would be faced together in the light, with the truth finally spoken aloud. The crowd around them grew larger as Joseph continued his statement, detailing the years of evidence he had compiled and the cover-up that had forced him into hiding. Sarah watched the faces of the people listening, seeing shock, skepticism, and growing understanding as the scope of what Joseph was revealing became clear. By noon, the courthouse steps had become the center of a media circus that ensured Joseph's story could not be suppressed or ignored. The evidence they had so carefully distributed over the previous weeks was now being connected to a living witness who could testify to its authenticity and significance. Their gamble had worked. The truth was finally free, and with it perhaps their chance for a real future together. The aftermath of Joseph's public revelation unfolded with a speed and intensity that surprised even those who had carefully orchestrated it. Within hours of his courthouse statement, federal marshals had taken both Sarah and Joseph into protective custody, not as criminals but as witnesses whose testimony was now crucial to multiple ongoing investigations. The safe house where they were relocated was far different from their mountain cabin hideout. This was a secure federal facility with armed guards, sophisticated surveillance systems, and teams of lawyers and investigators who worked around the clock to verify and expand upon the evidence Joseph had preserved for 15 years, Sarah found herself at the center of a legal and political storm that she could never have imagined when she first stepped off her father's truck at the reservation. Congressional hearings were scheduled, grand juries were convened, and news organizations competed to uncover additional details about the conspiracy that Joseph's evidence had exposed. The children remained in Canada, still separated from their parents, but now for reasons of legal protection rather than desperate flight. Elena served as the primary communication link, traveling back and forth to ensure that Tommy and Mary understood that their separation was temporary and that their parents were finally safe to fight for justice rather than simply survival. They're doing well, Elena reported during one of her visits to the federal facility. Tommy has started school there and is already at the top of his class. Mary has made friends with her host family's daughter. They miss you terribly, but they're proud of what you're doing. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and sometimes overwhelming. But Sarah discovered that her months of partnership with Joseph had prepared her well for the challenges of testifying before congressional committees and grand juries. She had become not just a witness to Joseph's story, but an active participant in the fight for justice that had consumed their lives. The evidence that Joseph had so carefully preserved proved to be even more damaging to the conspiracy than anyone had anticipated. Computer files that he had thought contained only financial records actually included encrypted communications between co-conspirators. Photographs that seemed to show routine government meetings actually documented illegal negotiations with foreign arms dealers. Personnel files revealed a network of corruption that reached into agencies and departments that most Americans trusted implicitly. As the investigations progressed, more whistleblowers emerged from within the government, emboldened by Joseph's courage and protected by the media attention that made their elimination impossible. The conspiracy began to unravel not just through external investigation, but through internal collapse as participants turned against each other to minimize their own legal exposure. 6 months after their dramatic courthouse appearance, Sarah and Joseph watched from the witness gallery as the first high-ranking conspirator was sentenced to federal prison. The judge's comments about the importance of government employees who choose conscience over convenience brought tears to Sarah's eyes as she realized that Joseph's 15-year sacrifice was finally being recognized and validated. The personal cost of their victory was significant but not permanent. Sarah's relationship with her father was strained but slowly healing, as he came to understand that his daughter had chosen to fight for principles that he himself had always claimed to support. The reservation community welcomed them back as heroes, though the transition to normal life proved more challenging than either had anticipated. Joseph struggled with the adjustment from constant vigilance to relative safety. Years of hyper-awareness and strategic thinking were not easily abandoned, and he sometimes found himself planning escape routes from the grocery store or analyzing the security implications of school events. Sarah helped him navigate this transition by creating new routines and goals that channeled his protective instincts into positive directions. The children's return was orchestrated carefully to ensure their emotional well-being. Tommy and Mary had grown during their months in Canada, not just physically but in confidence and resilience. They had learned that family bonds could survive separation, and that their parents were people worthy of respect and admiration, not just love. Mary's first words when she saw Sarah again were characteristically direct. "Did you win?" "We won," Sarah confirmed, kneeling down to embrace the little girl who had become her daughter in every way that mattered. The reunion was not without its challenges. The children had to readjust to their original home and family structure, while processing the knowledge that their father was a public figure whose story was now known throughout the country. Tommy, in particular, struggled with the attention their family received and the weight of being the son of a famous whistleblower. Sarah found herself taking on the role of family spokesperson, managing media requests and public appearances while protecting the children's privacy and normalcy. She discovered that she had developed skills in communication and crisis management that served them well in navigating their new public life. A year after their courthouse revelation, Sarah and Joseph made a decision that surprised many who knew their story. Rather than capitalizing on their fame or pursuing lucrative opportunities in Washington or media centers, they chose to remain on the reservation and rebuild their quiet life. Joseph returned to ranching, though he also began working with government oversight organizations to improve whistleblower protection systems. Sarah started a nonprofit organization focused on supporting families of government whistleblowers, using her own experience to help others navigate the complex challenges of choosing conscience over safety. Their marriage, which had begun as a practical arrangement between strangers, had evolved into a partnership based on shared values, mutual respect, and deep love. The trials they had faced together had created bonds that went far beyond conventional romance or traditional family structures. On the second anniversary of their public revelation, Sarah stood on the front porch of their ranch house watching Joseph teach Tommy how to repair a fence, while Mary played with a new litter of puppies. The scene was peaceful and ordinary, the kind of moment that would have seemed impossible during their months of hiding and fear. Elena joined her on the porch, bringing coffee and the satisfied expression of someone who had seen justice prevail. "Any regrets?" Elena asked, settling into the chair beside Sarah. Sarah considered the question seriously. Their lives had been permanently changed by the choices they had made. They would never be completely anonymous or entirely safe. The children would grow up knowing that their family was different, that their father's courage had come at a significant cost, and that their mother had chosen to share that cost willingly. But as she watched her family enjoying a simple afternoon together, Sarah realized that she had gained far more than she had lost. She had found her purpose in fighting for justice, her strength in protecting people she loved, and her happiness in a partnership that had been tested by the worst circumstances and emerged stronger. "No regrets," she said finally. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The truth that Joseph had hidden for so long had indeed unraveled everything in their old life, but in doing so, it had created the foundation for something better. They had learned that safety built on deception was ultimately no safety at all, while truth, however dangerous, provided the only solid ground on which to build a real future. As the sun set over the reservation that had provided them shelter in their darkest hours and celebration in their triumph, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her from an arranged marriage to a love story that had changed not just their lives, but the lives of countless others who would benefit from the corruption that had been exposed and the systems that had been reformed. Their story had become more than a personal triumph. It had become a testament to the power of ordinary people to choose extraordinary courage when faced with the choice between comfortable lies and dangerous truth. And in making that choice together, they had discovered that some things, justice, integrity, and love, were worth any sacrifice required to protect them.